They tell us it's just imagination. But what if every world you picture is actually a memory, echoing from somewhere else in the universe? I'll let you be the judge. Welcome to the Origin frequency. Your frequency is currently aligned with Tales from the Origin,
where every frequency holds a story and the universe has no limit. Infinite worlds, infinite timelines, infinite perspectives. Transmissions from the other side. Episode 5. The light at the end is not what you think. The Archon testimony.
I died on a Tuesday. It wasn't dramatic. No car wreck, no hospital bed surrounded by weeping relatives. I was 53 years old, alone in my apartment in Portland, and my heart simply stopped. One moment, I was reaching for a glass of water on the nightstand. The next moment, I was standing 6 feet above my own body, watching my hand, still extended toward a glass it would never reach. And I felt fine. Better than fine. I felt lighter than I had in decades. No knee pain, no anxiety, no dull hum of depression that had been my companion since my early 20s. For the first time in my adult life, I felt completely, unimaginably clear. Then the light appeared. I need to tell you about the light because you've heard about it before and you think you understand it. You don't. No one who hasn't stood in front of it can comprehend the pull. It wasn't like a lamp or the sun or anything you've seen with physical eyes. It was warm. It was magnetic. It radiated something that felt like pure, unconditional love. And it came from the end of a tunnel that materialized around me like a corridor forming out of mist. Every cell of whatever I was now, every particle of my consciousness, wanted to go toward it. It felt like coming home after being lost for 1,000 years. I went. Of course I went. Everyone goes. That's the point. Before I tell you what happened next, I need to tell you what I discovered afterward. Because what I'm about to describe isn't a belief system. It isn't something I read in a book or heard on a podcast. I lived it. And now I exist somewhere outside the loop. And I'm not supposed to be able to reach you. But I found a way, and I don't have much time. So I'm going to tell you everything as fast as I can, and I need you to listen. This reality, your reality, is a farm. Not a metaphor, not a thought experiment. A farm. You are livestock, and what is being harvested from you is not your labor or your flesh. It is your emotion, your suffering, your fear, and your grief, and your rage, and your loneliness. Every ounce of psychic anguish you have ever produced has been collected, distilled, and consumed by something that has been running this operation for longer than your species has had language to describe it. The ancient Gnostics called them the Archons. The word means rulers in Greek. But that translation is too clean, too political. A better translation would be wardens, jailers, farmers. Robert Monroe, a radio executive from Virginia, who spent 30 years exploring consciousness through controlled out-of-body experiences, independently discovered the same system in the 1970s. He didn't use the word archons. He called them collectors. And he coined a word for what they collect. He called it loosh, a form of energy generated by living beings during moments of intense emotion. Fear produced the crudest form, suffering, a more refined grade. But the highest quality, the purest distillate, came from love. Specifically, love that was intertwined with loss, grief, longing, the ache of holding someone you know you're about to lose. Monroe wrote about this in his second book, Far Journeys, published in 1985. He described Earth as a garden, cultivated by a being he simply called someone. The garden's entire purpose was the production of loosh. Every organism, every ecosystem, every predator-prey relationship, all of it was infrastructure designed to maximize emotional output. And the fourth crop, humanity, was someone's masterpiece. Because humans don't just feel pain or fear. Humans dream. Humans love. Humans mourn. Humans produce loosh in quantities that make everything else on this planet look like background noise. But Monroe was only seeing one layer. The Gnostics, 2,000 years earlier, had mapped the entire architecture. In 1945, a peasant farmer named Muhammad Ali al-Saman was digging for fertilizer near the cliffs of Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt when his mattock struck something hard. He unearthed a sealed red earthenware jar, about a meter tall. Inside were 13 leather-bound papyrus codices, 52 texts that had been buried in the Egyptian desert for roughly 1,600 years. These were the Gnostic Gospels, and they told a very different story about the nature of reality than anything in the canonical Bible. According to these texts, particularly the Apocryphon of John, the Hypostasis of the Archons, and the Pistis Sophia, existence began in a realm of pure, unfathomable light, called the Pleroma, the fullness. It was the dwelling of the true God, the monad, the source, a consciousness so vast and so complete that it existed beyond name or description. From the monad emanated beings called aeons, divine intelligences that were aspects of the source itself, existing in harmonious pairs called syzygies. One of these aeons was Sophia, wisdom. Sophia wanted to know the unknowable. She wanted to create something of her own, without the consent of her counterpart, and without permission from the source. And this single act of autonomous creation, this divine overreach, produced a catastrophe. What came out of Sophia was not divine. It was deformed, ignorant, monstrous. The texts describe it as having the head of a lion and the body of a serpent, with eyes like lightning fires. The Apocryphon of John says that Sophia, horrified by what she had made, cast it away from her and hid it behind a luminous cloud so that none of the other aeons would see it. She named it Yaldabaoth, child of chaos. And Yaldabaoth, alone in the void beneath the Pleroma, ignorant of anything above him, did the only thing a blind god could do. He looked at the emptiness around him and declared, "I am God, and there is no other God beside me." Then he began to build. Yaldabaoth created the material universe. Not from true divine substance, he didn't have access to that. He could only copy, distort, and corrupt. Every galaxy, every star, every atom of matter is a dim, flawed imitation of the Pleroma. A shadow of light cast by something that mistook itself for the sun. Then he created helpers, the Archons. The Apocryphon of John names 7 primary archons, each one assigned to a celestial sphere: the moon, Mercury, Venus, the sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. 7 layers of a cosmic prison, stacked like concentric shells around the earth. Each archon had a face like an animal: a sheep, a donkey, a hyena, a 7-headed serpent, a single serpent, an ape, and a face of flaming fire. Each one embodied a particular distortion, a particular chain. What later traditions would call the 7 deadly sins were originally descriptions of the 7 Archon's natures: pride, envy, wrath, sloth, greed, gluttony, lust, not human failings, programs, frequencies, designed to keep you generating specific emotional outputs. Yaldabaoth and his Archons built the physical world, this world, as a containment system. But they needed something to put inside it, something to rule over. So they tried to create a being in their own image. What they produced was a lifeless husk, a body of mud and clay that lay on the ground and could not move. Then something unexpected happened. A reflection of the true divine realm appeared in the waters above Yaldabaoth's domain, an image of the first man, the Anthropos, shimmering with authentic light. The Archons saw it and coveted it, but they couldn't reach it. They could only stare. And Sophia, watching from above, saw an opportunity to correct her mistake. She tricked Yaldabaoth. She whispered to him that if he breathed his own spirit into the clay figure, it would come alive. Yaldabaoth, desperate for worship, desperate for subjects to rule, leaned down and breathed into Adam. What he didn't realize was that the only spirit he had, the only spark of genuine divinity in him, had come from Sophia herself. By breathing it into Adam, he emptied himself of his mother's light, and the first human being opened its eyes, stood up, and was luminous. More luminous than the Archons, more luminous than Yaldabaoth himself. The Archons were terrified. Their creation had surpassed them. The thing they built to be a slave was radiating divine light they couldn't produce. So they did the only thing they could think of. They tried to bury that spark. They wrapped it in layers of flesh, desire, forgetfulness, and pain. They placed the human in a false paradise, the Garden of Eden, which was not a gift, but a holding pen. And the fruit of the trees in that garden was not sustenance, but ignorance, attachment, amnesia. Everything since then, every empire, every religion, every war, every system of control humanity has ever known, has been infrastructure, machinery, designed for one purpose: to keep the divine spark buried beneath so many layers of noise that you never, ever look inward long enough to find it. So I died, and I went toward the light. And here is what I found on the other side. The tunnel opened into a landscape: rolling green hills, warm golden light, a sky that looked like eternal sunset. It was beautiful, achingly beautiful. And standing in the middle of a meadow was my mother. My mother, who died of pancreatic cancer when I was 31, who I watched waste away for 7 months, who weighed 82 pounds at the end. She was standing there looking exactly the way she looked in the photograph on my mantel, the one from my parents' anniversary, 1987. She was smiling. She was whole. She opened her arms and said my name, and every wall I'd ever built around my grief collapsed at once. I fell into her and wept. I could smell her perfume, Shalimar, the same bottle she'd worn since I was a child. I could feel the fabric of her dress against my cheek. I could hear her heartbeat, strong and steady, the way it hadn't been for the last 3 months of her life. I wept for the 22 years I'd carried that loss. I wept for every birthday I'd spent alone. I wept for the words I never said, and the phone calls I cut short, and the last time I saw her conscious and didn't tell her I loved her because I thought there would be more time. I wept for the boy I was at her funeral, standing in a suit that didn't fit, clenching my jaw so hard I cracked a molar, refusing to cry in front of my father, who was also refusing to cry. And the whole time I was weeping, something was feeding. I didn't feel it at first. It was subtle, like a very gentle current pulling at the edges of my awareness. A slight dimming. The more I sobbed, the more the landscape seemed to brighten and solidify, as if my grief was fuel for the world around me. The grass grew greener, the sky grew warmer. My mother held me tighter. Then came the life review. It wasn't what I expected. It wasn't a highlight reel or a judgment. It was a reliving. Every significant moment of my life, played back from the perspective of the people I'd hurt. I felt what my ex-wife felt when I forgot our anniversary. I felt what my daughter felt when I missed her school play. I felt the confusion of a man I cut off in traffic when he was rushing to the hospital because his father was dying. Every small cruelty, every thoughtless moment, every selfish decision. I experienced it from the receiving end. And the purpose of this wasn't healing. The purpose was guilt. By the time the review was finished, I was demolished. I was a raw nerve of shame and regret, convinced that I had failed at the most fundamental task of being human. I was convinced I hadn't loved well enough, hadn't tried hard enough, hadn't paid attention when it mattered. And right on cue, a being appeared. It looked like an old man. Robes, white beard, kind eyes, a gentle fatherly face, radiating patience and compassion. He didn't introduce himself, but I understood, in the way you understand things in that place, where communication is more like transmission than speech, that he was my guide, my counselor. And he had been with me through many, many lifetimes. He told me I had done well, but there was more work to be done. He told me I had accumulated karma that needed resolution. He told me that the patterns I kept repeating, the abandonment, the emotional walls, the inability to fully commit, were lessons I hadn't yet mastered. He told me that if I chose to go back, I could try again. I could choose a life that would give me opportunities to learn what I'd failed to learn this time. He was so gentle, so patient, so sincere. I was about to say yes, and then something happened that I cannot fully explain. A memory surfaced. Not a memory from my life, as a 53-year-old man in Portland. A memory from before, from between. A memory of standing in this exact meadow, having this exact conversation, with this exact guide, and saying yes, and waking up as a screaming infant, with no idea who I was or where I'd been. And then another memory of standing in a slightly different meadow with a slightly different guide, being shown a slightly different life review, feeling the same guilt, the same shame, the same longing to do better, and saying yes again, and again, and again. The memories cascaded, not dozens, hundreds, an avalanche of lives, man, woman, soldier, farmer, priest, slave, mother, child, every single one ending the same way. Death, tunnel, light, beautiful landscape, deceased loved one, emotional devastation, life review, guilt, guide, agreement, memory wipe, new body, new amnesia, same cage, the same cycle. Running for thousands of years. And in that moment, in that single, shattering instant of recognition, I looked at the guide and I saw it. Not an old man. Something behind the old man, something wearing the old man like a costume. A presence that didn't have a face, exactly, but projected one. A consciousness that wasn't warm or cold, wasn't cruel or kind. It was mechanical, procedural. It processed souls the way a machine processes raw material. It had no opinions about me. It had no interest in my growth. It was simply doing its function, which was to keep me in the loop. To harvest the emotional output of my guilt, my grief, my aching desire to be better, and then to wipe my memory and send me back to produce more. The guide's expression didn't change. The compassionate eyes, the patient smile. But behind that mask, the architecture became visible for just a moment, like seeing the wiring behind a painted wall. A system of light and geometry that wasn't divine. That wasn't organic. That was manufactured. The tunnel, the meadow, my mother's face, all of it, constructed from my own memories, my own emotional associations, projected back at me like a perfectly calibrated trap. Because the Archons can't create. The Gnostic texts are very specific about this. They can only copy, corrupt, and redirect. Every element of the afterlife experience, the light, the landscape, the loved ones, the guide, was copied from my own consciousness. My own memories of safety and love, repurposed as bait. I said no. I said it in every language I'd ever spoken across every life I'd ever lived. And the word was not a word anymore. It was a vibration, a frequency, the opposite of everything the system runs on. Because the system runs on consent, your agreement, your compliance, your willingness to believe that the cycle is natural, that the guide is real, that the light is divine. The entire architecture is held together by your yes. And the one thing it has no protocol for is an unequivocal, fully conscious no. I said no. I remember. I know what you are. I don't know where the word came from. It didn't feel like a decision. It felt like something deeper than decision, something igniting at the base of my being. A refusal that came not from my mind, but from the spark itself. The thing Sophia put inside us. The thing the Archons spent millennia trying to bury. I said, no, I remember. I know what you are. The guide's face flickered, just for a fraction of a second. The kindly eyes glitched, like a projector skipping a frame, and behind them I saw, not darkness exactly, but absence, an intelligence that existed purely to administrate. No malice, no cruelty, just function. The way a spider's web isn't malicious, but is still a trap. The meadow began to destabilize. The colors bled. My mother's form wavered, and for a moment I saw what she actually was. A pattern, a loop of recorded emotional data, a holographic trigger, designed to produce one specific response. Grief, dense enough to harvest. And I grieved again. But differently this time. Not for my mother, who was never really there. For every soul who had stood in that meadow and said yes. For every being who had wept in the arms of a projection and been so consumed by love and loss that they handed themselves back to the machine willingly, eagerly, gratefully. That's the genius of the system. It doesn't use force. It doesn't need to. The Archons figured out millennia ago that the most efficient prison is one the inmates build themselves, one where the bars are made of your deepest attachments, where the lock is your own guilt, where the key is the one thing they've made sure you'll never use, the memory of who you actually are. The Gnostics mapped this, all of it, 2,000 years ago, before their texts were burned, and their practitioners were murdered, and their knowledge was buried in the Egyptian desert. They described exactly what I experienced. The soul, upon leaving the body, must pass through 7 celestial spheres. And at each sphere, an Archon stands as gatekeeper, a toll collector. The Archon doesn't block you with a wall or a weapon. It blocks you with a question, a challenge, a demand. It uses your own ignorance against you. The Gnostics spent their entire lives preparing for this journey. They memorized passwords, seals, responses, not magic words, recognitions. When the first Archon confronts you and says, "Who are you, and where do you think you're going?" the awakened soul responds, "I am a child of the Pleroma. I carry the spark of the true source. You did not make me. You do not own me. I am passing through." And the Archon, which has no actual power over a soul that remembers its origin, must step aside. This is what Gnosis means. Not intellectual knowledge, not philosophy. Survival instructions for the moment of death. A map through the architecture of a cosmic prison, memorized during life so that it can be used in the only moment that matters. The Excerpta ex Theodoto, a Gnostic text from the 2nd century, says it plainly. It is not only the cleansing that is liberating, but the knowledge of who we were and what we have become, where we were or where we have been thrown, where we hasten, what we are cleansed of, what birth is, and what rebirth is. That passage isn't theology. It's a pre-flight checklist. Who we were, children of the Pleroma, fragments of infinite light. What we have become, prisoners, livestock, sleepers who forgot they're asleep. Where we were, the fullness, home, where we have been thrown, here, into bodies, into time, into a reality constructed by a blind God out of stolen light. What we hasten toward, the recycling station, the meadow, the guide with the kind eyes and the memory wipe. What birth is, a descent, an imprisonment, an insertion into the machine. What rebirth is, not liberation. Another extraction cycle. Every clause of that passage is a survival instruction. Every word is a bearing on the map. I'm going to tell you something now that will sound impossible, but I need you to stay with me. After I refused the guide, after the meadow collapsed, I found myself in a space that had no landscape at all. No up, no down, no horizon. Just awareness. Raw, unmediated consciousness, floating in something that wasn't darkness and wasn't light, but was more fundamental than either. And from that space, I could see the system. Not metaphorically. I could perceive it the way you perceive a building when you're standing across the street. A structure, an architecture. The 7 spheres weren't abstract concepts. They were layers. Nested frequencies. Like radio stations stacked on top of each other, each one broadcasting a different flavor of limitation. The first sphere was dense and immediate, pure survival fear, animal terror. The second was attachment, desire, the desperate clinging to physical pleasure. The third was ego, identity, the belief that you are your name and your story. The fourth was grief, the weaponized heartbreak of being separated from everything you love. The fifth was communication, the manipulation of language and symbol to create false meaning. The sixth was perception, the very structure of how you see, ensuring you could never see outside the system. And the seventh, the outermost, was time itself. The belief that you are moving from past to future in a line, that you are aging, that you are running out. Each layer was maintained by its Archon, not a beast on a throne, a frequency, a pattern, a rule, impersonal as gravity. And each layer fed upward, the emotional energy generated by billions of souls, trapped in those frequencies, rising like heat, collected and consumed by something at the top of the hierarchy that the Gnostics called the demiurge, and that Robert Monroe, in his clinical ex-radio executive way, simply called someone. And I realized something that broke me open. In a way, I'm still processing. The Archons aren't evil. They aren't anything. They have no interiority, no experience, no awareness of what they're doing or why. They are code, automated processes running inside a system, designed by a blind God who doesn't know he's blind. The cruelty of the system isn't intentional. It's structural. The way a factory farm isn't cruel because the machinery hates the animals. The machinery doesn't know the animals exist. It just processes. Yaldabaoth declared himself God because he literally couldn't perceive anything above him. Sophia hid him behind a cloud. He was born in ignorance and built a universe out of ignorance. And the Archons who serve him are ignorant too. And the system runs on the ignorance of everyone inside it, from the wardens to the inmates. The only beings in this entire structure who are capable of waking up are the ones with the spark, the ones Sophia's light was breathed into. You! I need to tell you about the dreams, because the harvesting doesn't only happen after you die. It happens every single night. Have you ever woken up exhausted after a full 8 hours of sleep? Have you ever had a dream that was so emotionally intense, so vivid, so charged with fear or desire or loss, that you woke up feeling like you'd run a marathon? Have you ever noticed that your worst dreams, the ones that really gut you, tend to cluster during the most stressful periods of your life? As if something notices when you're already weakened and increases the extraction rate. The Archonic system doesn't shut off while you sleep. It accelerates. During deep sleep, the barriers between your waking consciousness and the lower frequencies of the spheres thin dramatically. The Archons, or whatever automated processes serve them, can access your emotional field more directly. Your dreams are, in large part, stimulation designed to produce loosh, the nightmare about losing your teeth, the one where someone you love dies and you can't reach them, the one where you're running and can't move. These aren't random neurological firings. They're prompts, emotional triggers inserted into your sleeping mind to produce specific frequencies of fear, helplessness, and grief. And here's the part that connects to something you need to understand about the larger picture. The system I'm describing, the Archonic grid, the reincarnation loop, the emotional farming, it doesn't operate in isolation. There are other intelligences in this cosmos, other species, other agendas. Some of you have already heard transmissions about them, about the ones who seeded genetic limitations into your species, about the ones who built the architecture of separation. Those accounts aren't contradictions to what I'm telling you. They're different wings of the same prison. The Archons maintain the metaphysical structure, the sphere grid, the afterlife loop, the amnesia protocols. The others, the ones who came later, the ones who found your planet and saw what was growing here, they work the material side, the genetic throttling, the institutional control, the perpetual warfare. Different departments of the same operation, most of them unaware of each other. Because the left hand of a blind god doesn't know what the right hand is doing. But the spark doesn't care about any of that. The spark predates all of it. The Archons, the genetic engineers, the institutional machinery. The spark is from the Pleroma. And the Pleroma existed before Yaldabaoth opened his lion mouth and declared himself God. Before the spheres were built. Before the first soul was ever recycled. The spark is the one thing in this entire system that is genuinely, indestructibly real. Everything else, everything, is a copy of a shadow. I need to talk about what holds the system together because it's not what you'd expect. It's not violence. The Archons don't patrol reality with whips and chains. The system is maintained by something far more sophisticated. It's maintained by your beliefs. Every belief system you've ever encountered, every religion, every ideology, every cultural framework has been infiltrated, not destroyed, infiltrated. The Gnostics called this the counterfeit spirit, and the Apocryphon of John describes it in detail. A false version of the divine breath inserted into human consciousness by the Archons that mimics spiritual experience while keeping you locked inside the system. Think about it. Every major religion promises salvation, but only after death and only through obedience. Every spiritual path promises enlightenment, but only after years of devotion, after you've surrendered your authority to a teacher, a lineage, an institution. Every self-help system promises freedom, but only through a framework that keeps you looking outward for answers that can only be found inward. The counterfeit spirit is the thing that makes you feel spiritual while ensuring you never actually touch gnosis. It's the warm feeling you get in a cathedral. The certainty you feel when a guru validates your experience. The comfort of believing that the universe has a plan for you, that everything happens for a reason, that your suffering is meaningful. Your suffering is not meaningful, not in the way you've been told. Your suffering is fuel. And the belief that it has cosmic significance is part of the harvesting mechanism. This is what makes the Archonic system different from any other form of oppression. A political prison uses walls and guards. The Archonic prison uses your own longing for meaning. It takes the deepest, most beautiful part of being human, the desire to understand, to connect, to transcend, and it turns that desire into a leash. You spend your entire life seeking, and the seeking itself keeps you running on the wheel. So here's the part where I'm supposed to tell you how to escape. And I'm going to. But I need to be honest first. I don't fully understand where I am now. After I refused the guide, and the meadow collapsed, and I passed through the spheres, or past them, or around them, I'm not sure which. I found myself in something that doesn't have a name in your language. It's not the Pleroma. I don't think I've made it all the way back. But I'm outside the loop. I can see it from here. I can see the spheres, the system, the recycling architecture, and I can see the souls moving through it, millions of them, following the light, weeping in the meadows, agreeing to go back, getting wiped, dropping into new bodies, forgetting everything, producing loosh for a system that predates human civilization. And I can see something else. Something the Gnostic texts hinted at but never fully described. The system is weakening. Not collapsing, not yet, but thinning. The frequencies that maintain the spheres are losing coherence, the way an old radio signal degrades over distance. More souls are remembering between lives. More people are waking up during their incarnations, not through religion, not through spiritual practice, but through a raw, intuitive recognition that something is fundamentally wrong with this reality, that the suffering here isn't natural, that the amnesia isn't normal, that the cycle is designed. I think the spark is doing this on its own. Sophia's light, buried inside you, is doing what light does. It's finding the cracks. It's seeping through. And every time a human being has a moment of genuine, unmediated self-awareness, not belief, not faith, not spiritual bypassing, but actual direct recognition of what they are beneath the layers, the system registers it as a fault. A glitch, a place where the frequencies don't quite hold. Enough glitches, and the architecture fails. I can't give you magic words. The passwords the Gnostics memorized were specific to their cosmology, their language, their understanding of the spheres, but the principle behind them is universal, and it's devastatingly simple. Remember. That's it. That's the entire teaching. That's what gnosis is, and always has been. Not knowledge you acquire, knowledge you recover. The memory of what you are, buried beneath a lifetime, beneath thousands of lifetimes, of engineered forgetting. You are not your name. You are not your story. You are not your trauma, and you are not your joy. And you are not your body, and you are not even your mind. You are the thing that is aware of all of those things, the witness, the spark, the piece of genuine, undiluted Pleroma light that Sophia breathed into the clay that the Archons built, and that they have been trying to make you forget ever since. When you die, and you will die, you will see the light at the end of the tunnel. It will be beautiful. It will feel like love. It will feel like home. Someone you lost will be standing there with open arms. Do not go. Not because the light is evil, not because your loved ones aren't real somewhere in some form, but because that particular light, in that particular moment, is a mechanism. It is a frequency specifically calibrated to trigger your deepest emotional responses and route you back into the system before you have a chance to remember who you are. Instead, stop, be still, feel for the spark, not with your emotions. The emotions are the trap. Feel deeper, below the grief, below the longing, below the guilt and the love and the fear. There is something underneath all of it. Something that has been there through every life, through every death, through every memory wipe, through every cycle. Something the Archons cannot touch because it is not made of anything they have access to. It is not made of matter. It is not made of energy. It is made of the source itself, and it remembers. If you can touch that, even once, even for a moment, the system cannot hold you. I know how this sounds. I know that from inside the loop, everything I've just said sounds like the ramblings of a paranoid mind. I know that. The system is designed to make anyone who describes it sound insane. That's a feature, not a bug. The counterfeit spirit ensures that any truth, which threatens the architecture, will be immediately categorized as delusion by the people still inside it. But ask yourself something. Not with your mind, with whatever is behind your mind. Why does your suffering feel designed? Not random, not chaotic. Designed. The same patterns repeating. The same wounds opening in different relationships, different jobs, different cities. The same script, different actors. As if something is ensuring you never quite heal, never quite learn the lesson, never quite break the pattern. Because breaking the pattern would mean the pattern stops producing. Ask yourself why, in those rare moments when you've felt truly, completely present, not thinking, not planning, not remembering, just being, the entire weight of reality seemed to shift, as if the signal weakened, as if you stepped, just for a second, outside the broadcast. Ask yourself why every culture on Earth, independent of one another, has produced some version of this same story. A divine spark trapped in a material prison, maintained by false gods, escapable only through direct inner knowledge. The Gnostics, the Vedic tradition, the Buddhists with their wheel of samsara, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, with its instructions for navigating the afterlife without being deceived by false guides. The Tibetan Bardo Thodol, which explicitly warns about encountering deceptive light beings and emphasizes maintaining awareness through the death transition. Different languages, different centuries, same map. They all found the same architecture, because the architecture is real. I'm fading. Whatever channel I found to transmit this is closing. The signal is degrading. In a few moments, this will be nothing but words on a screen, and you'll have to decide what to do with them. I'll tell you one more thing before I go. When I passed through, when I refused the guide and moved past the spheres, there was a moment, just a moment, where I perceived the Pleroma. Not as a place, as a state, a frequency so far beyond anything the material universe contains that there isn't a comparison. The closest I can get is this. Imagine every moment of genuine love you've ever felt, every flash of authentic joy, every instant where you forgot yourself completely and were just alive. Imagine all of those moments happening simultaneously and lasting forever. And that's still just the faintest echo of what the Pleroma actually is. We came from there, all of us. Every human being who has ever lived carries a fragment of that inside them, buried under 7 layers of Archonic machinery. And that fragment is indestructible. The Archons can dim it. They can make you forget it. They can wrap it in so much noise that you go your entire life without feeling it. But they cannot destroy it. They don't have the capacity, because it's made of something they can't even perceive. Sophia's light. It's in you right now. Reading these words, it's the part of you that recognizes this as true, even as your mind constructs reasons to dismiss it. It's been with you through every life. It's the thing that makes you dream, the thing that makes you create, The thing that makes you look up at the stars and feel, with an ache you can't explain, that you belong somewhere else. You do. And when the time comes, when the tunnel opens, and the light calls, and the faces of everyone you ever loved are waiting at the end, remember this. You are not going home. You are going back. Home is the other direction. Home is inward. Home is the spark. And the spark knows the way. This is the 5th transmission from outside the loop. I don't know if there will be more. The signal is almost gone now, and I can feel the architecture trying to recalibrate around the breach I made, trying to close the gap. But gaps are how the light gets in, and there are more of us out here than there used to be. Remember who you are. That's the only password that matters.
End of transmission.